Hello and welcome to Fork in the Road. My name is Rusty Gaylord and I am your host. I'm happy to be here with you. Fork in the Road is a conversation with smart, successful, interesting people about the decisions they've made and the changes in direction in their life that got them to where they are today. So I'm super happy to have on today Allia Mohamed. Allia is the co-founder and the CEO of openigloo. We'll get to talk a little bit about that and you'll hear more about it. And so let's bring her on. Allia, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You bet. So, one of the things I think is interesting about you is your path took you into venture capital and you left venture capital to be an entrepreneur. And a lot of people do that the opposite way. They're an entrepreneur first and then they go into venture capital. So how is it that you made that switch going in that direction?
Yeah, I've done a couple of things backwards in my life, and that was definitely one of them. So I started my career in finance and capital markets, working on a trading floor, studied finance both in undergrad and grad school. So finance was always, my passion and my interest. And VC seemed like this great, impactful way to leverage my analytical skills, but also be hands-on talking to founders. And then doing that for a couple of years, I started to, get a little bit of the entrepreneurial bug on my own, which I had never had previously. But one of the great things about VC is you're talking to founders every single day. They are super inspiring. They're solving pain points in their personal and professional lives, and they're going out and doing it. So that sort of just got me thinking, what are the pain points in my life that I could potentially solve with technology that I think I have the skill set to tackle? And that sort of, started the ideation phase for me on what I wanted to build.
Interesting. Well, I know we've chatted a little bit about this, but you can, and this gets to the origin story of openigloo too. But like, what was that pain point, and how did you solve it yourself? Because I love you talked about entrepreneurs, they get out and do stuff. You went out and did it. So I'd love to hear that little story of
yeah. So the pain point I kept coming back to for me was living and renting in New York. So being in New York, going on 10 years, renting a handful of apartments, one building in particular, landlord was super unresponsive. Heat always broke in the dead of winter. And I just had this frustration of, I'm paying a lot of money to live here. Like the least the landlord could do is pick up the phone when something's going wrong. So when I was looking for my next apartment, I wanted to do more research, get the answers I was looking for. So I went very low tech, started standing outside of buildings, waiting for people walking in and out. And this is pre-pandemic. So I would just go up to people and say, hey, do you live here? What's the story? Should I move in? And got really valuable information by doing that. So that was a bit of the light bulb for openigloo, which was, could we crowdsource these tenant reviews, combine it with city data, and give renters a background check on the building and landlord and management company before they move in. And I'm sure a lot of renters listening, they've experienced the application process for getting an apartment. You're sharing a lot of information on yourself and your financial background, and you really get little information in return on where you're moving into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Well, I know we could talk all day about openigloo because you guys are doing cool stuff. So go check out the website because we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the leadership part about what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I think one of the things you said is so many of the entrepreneurs that you met were inspiring, right? They were passionate. They had a lot of energy, solving personal and professional pain points. So was this like, how did you know that this was the thing for you? Like when you got this idea, how did you know that was the idea you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I went about starting openigloo in a very methodical way because I was just sort of stealing learnings from all of the founders that I had spoken with. And sort of the thing that I noticed that was across the board was the founders that were really connected to the problem that they were solving were the ones that got through the lows of the roller coaster that is entrepreneurship, right? It's a really draining, I'm going to just call it profession, right? A lot of highs, a lot of lows, but the founders that were really passionate about what they were building were able to sort of get through those stages. So for me, when I was thinking about, okay, like if I'm really going to commit, money and time, potentially the next decade of my life, I need to feel really passionate about this. And for me, I just kept coming back to, transparency and housing is such a critical piece of society. And, supporting, there's 110 million renters in the United States. And I just kept feeling like this was a very neglected consumer group, and I was one of them, right? I had personal experiences. My parents had personal experiences. Every single renter I ever talked to had a negative experience. So for me, it was like, okay, this problem is big enough, and I feel connected to it, and it's a big enough problem that when things are not going right, I'm gonna stick it out.
Yeah. So I hear something in that, right? Because so many people that I've talked to who are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, they're looking for a business opportunity. And for many of them, it's this very intellectual process, right? It's like,
Mhm.
what is the market size? Is there, what are the competitors? Is there a product that I can introduce here that's going to solve this pain point? But one of the things you've talked about, even from the get-go, was it's not just this business opportunity, business pain point, but it's also a personal pain point. And you talked about that, right? It's like, well, I've had bad experiences. My friends have had bad experiences. My parents have had bad experiences, like most people have. And so there's something more than just the intellectual opportunity here, the hard numbers business opportunity is
Yeah,
what I'm
I think
hearing you say.
you have to have both, and especially coming from the VC background, like I also want to answer those questions, right? Like, is this
Of
a
course.
big enough market? Could we monetize this at some point? But I think one of the things that investors are paying a lot of attention to is founder market fit, right? It's not just about product market fit. It's like, does this founder have what it takes to take this idea and product to the next level? And that was something that I was just consistently asking myself: is it me? Can I do this?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's great because what you're talking about gets beyond the tangibles, right? It's not, does this person have the background to do this, right? It's like, is this founder the right fit with this market? And that is not a analytical question. That's more of a who you are kind of question, and your energy and your passions and all of that. So, one of the things I called this episode is who motivates the motivator, and tell us where that phrase comes from.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell, Rusty, but I'm a bit of an extrovert. I'm a very like sociable, high energy person, and that lends itself in my leadership style as well, right? Like energizing and motivating a team to really build the impossible, something that hasn't been done before, is such a key part of my job. But there's this other side to my personality, which is when I release all of that energy, I need that like recovery time as well, right? It's like it's a very draining process. And my dad is very similar. So him and I are very similar in personalities. When he's asking for an update, how's work, how's business? And I'm like, I'm a bit tired. And he always says like, who motivates the motivator? And he says herself. So it's just something I always come back to when I'm just like tired and drained and maybe things aren't going well, because as an entrepreneur, it's a very lonely journey. I'm lucky to have an amazing team and a co-founder that I can sort of lean on through those emotional ups and downs. But really, at the end of the day, it's about constantly motivating yourself. So I love that saying from my dad of, who motivates the motivator, herself or himself.
I love it too. And so it just begs the question to me, what do you do to motivate yourself?
You know what? The thing that I'm always thinking about is the people that we're helping. Like on those like days where you're just like super drained and things aren't going right. I have a folder in my email inbox of every single nice letter a user has sent to me and to the team. And that is just a really uplifting, motivating exercise to go through, which is, wow, like we've built something that's actually impacted people. And stories of someone saying, I almost signed a lease, and then I saw in openigloo that there was a history of bed bugs, or, that the landlord, you didn't, repair the boiler last season. All of these things. So we're giving this level of transparency. We're helping renters avoid problematic living situations. So definitely in those moments, reading through how we're supporting people is a good way.
I love that. One of the things I've encouraged some of my clients to do is go through and build their own success list, right? You have a nice situation that you get those successes emailed in from users, which is really cool. Not everybody has that, depending on what kind of business they're in, but you can always have your own success list. And to just remember, even in those times when you're struggling or when you're challenged or you're tired or whatever, you've had successes and they'll come back. I think that's such a simple but powerful tool. I love the way you use that.
It's so tough because as entrepreneurs, you're constantly thinking about the future and moving as fast as you can. And we rarely take a moment to reflect on what we've accomplished and how far we've come, because it never feels enough, right? It's a founder's job to never be satisfied with the progress that you've made. That's just the nature of the business. But I do think it's important to take a pause and reflect on the journey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I think that's interesting about that is oftentimes the founder is the one who's holding the energy and the vision on behalf of the company,
Mhm.
right? And you talked about that as like if you're bringing all that energy and motivating other people, and you're the center, but it really is you. And how do you think that energy impacts the other people around you?
Yeah. So one of the greatest, like one of my favorite things about being a founder is getting to build the team that I want, right? And this is something that I've never had control over in some of my past roles, is bringing people on board, not necessarily that are like me or think like me, but have the same passion for the problem that we're solving. So I would say we're a small team. We're 10 people at openigloo. The majority of us are New York City renters, so we're really connected to this problem. And luckily, I'm taking energy from them as well. It's not all one way, which is exactly how it should be. We have an ideas channel in Slack where people are sharing ideas that come up, product iterations, enhancements they want to make. So I think it's really great to build a team that also has similar energy to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I'm going on vacation next week, and I usually, this is a live conversation. So if you're listening to this, you are hearing us live in real time. But I recorded one early so that I can play it next week when I'm on vacation.
Mhm.
And it was a conversation with someone who was is sports author and researcher, but he applies those ideas to business. And he's talked about how some businesses want to hire athletes. And it's not for their skills per se, but it's for
Mhm.
their mindset.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, I mean, you talked about bringing a team and you like to hire people who have a passion, but what are some of those other kind of mindset like or intangible kinds of things that you look for as you're building a team?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about our team, and I say it all the time, is we are all doing a job that we have never done before. That is something really, really special, right? And something very unique to early stage startups, because as you grow and you have more funding and resources, you're bringing people onto the team that have done that task or that job in a previous role. But we're 10 people who are all figuring it out together as we go. And the really important quality in a situation like that is just a go-getter, high initiative attitude, which is I might not know how to do this right now, but I'm going to go and figure it out. And really happy to say that our entire team has that attitude. And it was also what I said at the beginning, which is, hey, you don't really have a clear job description. Like, we are still iterating. We're moving so fast that things are changing. Are you going to be okay with that type of environment and just roll with the punches and figure things out as they go? And if the answer was yes, I'm good with that. It's made for a really good team.
Yeah. I love that. Right. And so like looking for the characteristics of whether or not a person will be successful in that environment. So one of the things that I'm curious about is you're in this entrepreneurial environment now, right? 10 people without a real firm job description, but you've come from much more structured kind of environments, right? VC,
Yes.
maybe a little bit less so, but certainly banking and finance, that's pretty structured.
Yes.
What if you think back about that, are there similar characteristics about what makes someone successful in those kind of more structured environments versus less structured, or do you think it's quite different?
Yeah, it's very interesting question. I think structure and process has a place in certain stages of a company, right? A bank cannot operate the way that we're operating right now, right? Like, it would just be a disaster for
We
global
hope
finance.
not.
Exactly. So I think in certain stages and sizes, you need that structure and process. And what we keep talking about as a team is like, let's just enjoy this period that we have now, where we don't need to have that process, right? Like, even something as simple as declaring vacation days, right? We don't have a big HR system where someone is logging their vacation months in advance. When I was in banking, you needed to give notice, like 3 months notice for holiday. And that's something that we don't need to do as a small team. So the message I keep sharing is, let's take advantage of the stage that we're in right now, where we can be a little bit fragmented, because it's not always going to be this way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an appreciation of where you are today, which is interesting because just a few moments ago you said, part of the job of the founder is to never be satisfied,
Yes.
right? It's like to always be driving forward, and yet if you're never there, if you're never good enough, that can also be an energy drain. So it's like these things kind of work together. Is how can you appreciate where you are and what you've accomplished, and still be motivated to drive forward, but do that in a way that allows you to personally to be okay, because it's a lot of energy to feel like you're never there and you're never there and you're never there. So
Yeah.
how do you bring those pieces together?
Yeah, you've just described like an impossible situation, which is like you're never satisfied, but you're also having to think about the future, and reflect on the past and keep the team together. This is what makes entrepreneurship so special. Like people who actually like do this are sick. Like there's like, and I say that like, lightheartedly, like there is something that is different about, people that are volunteering to put themselves through this type of experience, right? Because there is no certainty. And the thing we've talked about this, I kind of came about this backwards. Like I came from the structured banking background. So my wiring is actually not like that. I've had to do a lot of rewiring in my brain to be fine with the lack of structure or process and things changing all the time. But that's what makes entrepreneurship so special. It's a lot of people that are not doing things in a conventional way, and that's ultimately what makes them so innovative.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think how have you changed during this entrepreneurial journey? Like what is, something that, because you alluded to, I mean, you talked about pain points, right? Both kind of marketplace pain points, but also personal pain points, and looking for the intersection of those. But the piece that I infer in there, and I don't know if this is what you meant or not, but there's also some element of like, how do you grow as a person, right? Because you had to rewire some things being
Yeah.
an entrepreneur. How do you think you've changed or become a better or stronger person as a result of this journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've learned a lot about myself. I think the biggest thing is just embracing the unknown, because, my personality, 10 years ago coming out of college was, this is my 5-year plan, right? I'm going to get promoted at this year, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. And I'm going to live in this city, and then I'm going to buy a house, and everything was like super methodical, right? And then you get into entrepreneurship, and there is no 5-year plan, right?
Mhm.
It is, of course, you're thinking about like 3 to 5 years what you want to accomplish, but really it's in these like 6 months chunks of just trying to hit milestones, and if you're not hitting them, reiterating and changing. That doesn't happen in corporate environments. If you're a lawyer or a banker or a consultant, the path is very clear and structured. So I would say that I've gotten a lot more comfortable with uncertainty, with the unknown, without having all of the answers, and not, things not needing to be perfect all the time, right? I think that those are some big things that have been a part of my transformation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think about, people who even in a bigger organization, as you move up in the levels of a bigger organization, uh, there's some degree of tolerating unknown, because you're not as close to the work as you used to be,
Yeah.
and you can't be in as many of the details. So how do you find that right balance of when you need to dive in and pin something down and get really clear about it, and when you can let it float and be unknown and uncertain? Because there's
Yeah.
certain situations that call for a decision and action. And I mean, you just said 6 month chunks, we're going for milestones, we're delivering, we're iterating on that, right? That's very clear and execution oriented.
Mhm.
And at the same time, there's some things that are uncertain. So like, how do you know when to do it one way or the other?
I hate to give a wishy-washy answer, but like you just know, you know what I mean? Like I think, for example, a lot of startups are experimenting with business models.
Yeah.
And you have this feeling when something is working, right? Like the sales conversations are flowing easier. Like the feedback that you're getting has like transformed and changed. So once you found that answer to something, that's when you're like lock and loaded. Like, let's just like hone in on this, just execute this one thing. There's maybe some other things surrounding it that are still like up in the air and being iterated on. But once you find that answer to, a question that you've been asking for months and months, really just focusing on it and executing.
Yeah. I'm going to put the word intuition out there.
Yeah.
Because anyway, it's been in conversations I've been having recently, and so it's top of mind for me.
Yes.
But there's a bit of intuition in this, right? It's like, it's, to some extent you've got some data, but it's not necessarily hard data. It's more like, oh, this seems to be going better, or I'm having better conversations. That's like, getting more traction. Sure, you could say that's good evidence, but it may not be quantifiable that you can track as a KPI or something.
Right.
So there's
And that
some degree of intuition.
totally. That comes back to the founder market fit that we were talking about, because when you as a founder are the user, that
Mhm.
intuition is much stronger because you know what you would like
Mhm.
to see in a product. Like, you know what your consumer pain points have been. One of the things that we did, especially in the early days, was we just set up interviews all the time with renters who were downloading the app, using the product, asking them not what their product experience was like, just what their like life experience was like. My interview question was always, can you tell me a little bit about what your experience living and renting in New York has been like? I
Yeah.
never asked them a question about the product. I never said, hey, did you like this feature or this button color? It was just, what are your pain points? And then over time, you're drawing this consensus and you're able to validate your intuition. But because I was in the same user group as them, it was a lot easier. The thing that actually I'm kind of struggling with a little bit now is I don't have that same sense of intuition for property owners and management. And
Mhm.
these are stakeholders in real estate that, we're building relationships and working with, but I don't have the same sense of intuition about what their pain points are as I do for the renter side. So that's an exercise we're going through right now.
Yeah, such a good observation. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, I'm curious about something. Another word that's been on my mind recently is power. And many people think that being in a position of power, they tend to interpret that as like power over somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it can end up with a negative connotation. And yet, I think there's something actually really powerful about being powerful. But it's about your personal power. It's about your conviction and your passion and believing in what you're doing and standing up for it. And I'm curious just to know, do you ever think about that? And do you ever think about kind of like, because the buck stops with you, right? As the CEO of openigloo, do you ever think about this notion of power and positive ways to demonstrate that and embody it as
Yeah.
the energy center of your business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've reflected a lot on some of the companies that have accumulated a lot of power and influence in the communities in which they operate. You think about Airbnb, you think about Uber. These companies have transformed the way that people are living, and they have a lot of power. So I think for me, I just think about, and it's nice to dream. What kind of power is openigloo going to have on communities at scale when we
Yeah.
really start solving the problems that we want to do, and making sure that that power is recognized and is implemented in a way that continues to be positive. I think
Mhm.
self-awareness when it comes to power is super key, and it's a fun thing to think about, even though it's a few years down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Allia, what a wide-ranging and interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining in this conversation about Fork in the Road. For somebody who wants to learn more about you or connect with you or learn about openigloo, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Allia Mohamed. Definitely check out the openigloo website, openigloo.com. Happy for you guys to look for apartments, read and share reviews about New York City rental experiences, and happy to chat more about business and startups. So definitely reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.